Hello everyone. Welcome to another S5 history class. Today we're going to start getting into a consideration of the formation of nation states. So we're going to focus on two instances, okay? The foundation of Italy as a nation state, as well as that of Germany. Now, as we talk about these two countries, these two nation states, it's good to keep in mind what came before. If you remember, we were talking about the aftermath of the defeat of Napoleon. So you have the conquest of Vienna, the concert of Europe, and then a little bit later on, the revolutions that happened in the year 1830 and then again in 1848. As you saw, as we've seen, some of these revolutions were quite successful, others not so. So it's very good to keep these things in mind as we talk about the formation of Italy and Germany as nation states. Now, before we get into this, let me discuss briefly a conflict that's totally relevant to our current topic, which is the Crimean War. So you can imagine this as you can understand this as a kind of immediate background to what happens, how Italy and Germany managed to emerge, after a few years, after some years, emerge as nation states. Okay, to give you some geographical background, although this map gives you a lot of details, it's good to focus on the Ottoman Empire here, which is in kind of dark blue. And up to a certain point, these two territories, Moldavia and Wallachia, they were part of the Ottoman Empire. This vast purple territory here, that's Russia, and then as you can see, here's the Austrian Empire. Okay, this is just to orient you geographically as to the conflict that will happen, you know, in this area here. So why does the Crimean War happen? There's a quite immediate reason. Okay, you can call it a pretext, but this was something that world leaders at that time were actually talking about. That this was their concern. So you just saw on this map that the Ottoman Empire actually controlled quite a bit of southeastern Europe there, including this. Okay, now the Ottoman Empire being an Islamic state, you can imagine that from the point of view of some European leaders, since some Christians were living under the Ottoman Empire, so they should have their European protector, their Christian protector. So traditionally, it 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 had been the Russian Tsar or the emperor who had this title and role, the protector of Christians, of those Christians who lived in um, the territories of the Ottoman Empire. Now, at this point, if you remember, Louis Napoleon, or as he styled himself, the second emperor, or Napoleon III, the emperor of the Second French Empire, wanted that role for himself, the role of the protector of Christians in the Ottoman Empire. Eventually the Ottomans would give it to him, and the Russians were not pleased, so they decided to invade a part of the empire, the Ottoman Empire. So I'm talking about these two territories here. Okay. However, there were also, in addition to the, you know, religious motivations, there were also other more political reasons why, you know, the Crimean War started. So there has been some conflict between Russia and the Ottoman Empire. As we said, the Ottomans, they controlled much of the territory in the Balkan region. At the same time, it's good to know that around this time, the Ottoman Empire was showing signs of decline. It was going down. Now, Russia, seeing an opportunity, wanted to expand its power in the area. This is something that the Russians always wanted. They wanted access to the Mediterranean Sea, access to the Dardanelles. This is very important for Russia because they've always wanted a warm water port. Okay, they have other ports, but they usually freeze. Now, having control of this area here would be so advantageous for them. They would have access to this vast sea, the Mediterranean. They could challenge British naval power in southeastern Mediterranean. And at the same time, given the situation that the Ottoman Empire was in decline, Russia was, you know, had ambitions and trying to expand its territories. Other European powers were, also interested and at the same time interested in this situation and at the same time quite wary. They were cautious and quite concerned about Russian ambitions. Of course, the idea was that they didn't want Russia to become too powerful. Remember, now Congress of Vienna, Concert of Europe, you know, this concern has been there, ever since the defeat of Napoleon. Again, just to give you an idea of the area or areas that we're talking about here. Again, the purple territory being the Russian Empire. The Austrians are here, ruling over a multinational empire. And again, another empire, the Ottoman Empire, ruling over, a vast area as well. This, if you zoom in, excuse me, you can see that these are the territories in contest at this time. So these are the territories invaded by Russia when they decided to do so. By 1853, Russia invades Moldavia and Wallachia. Um, these belong to the Ottomans, areas in the Balkan region. So the Ottomans declare war on Russia. And a year after, Great Britain and France would also declare war on Russia because they didn't want, they had the same concern. They didn't want Russia gaining too much, becoming too big, too powerful, that would upset the balance in Europe. Um, Austria, on the other hand, would largely stay neutral, although, in principle, it was allied with Russia. Remember, 1848, when the Russians helped the Austrians put down um, the Hungarian Revolution. So eventually, Great Britain and France will lay siege to Sevastopol. So that's in the Crimean region. That's also a port, an important port. Okay. In the end, this Crimean War, um, the Russians during the Crimean War in general was poorly planned and poorly fought. But at the same time, the Russian side suffered many losses. Eventually, they would be defeated, the Russians. So you have the Ottomans, Great Britain, and France winning. Okay, and then those territories that were invaded by Russia, they would still belong to the Ottoman Empire, but administered by the great powers at that time. So basically, the victors. Just just to give you an idea of where Sevastopol is, you can see here. Okay, that's Crimea, and Sevastopol is here, and the British and the French would prove successful in this conflict. Um, an aspect of the war was captured by Alfred Lord Tennyson in his poem "The Charge of the Light Brigade." If you ever do literature in English, maybe at university, you might come across this poem. It's a classic. It talks about 19th century values, military values, the idea of honor, of heroism, okay, of courage. So the poem talks about the charge of the light cavalry on the British side, and something goes wrong. They're given the wrong commands. They charge anyway, and they're slaughtered. At the same time, um, you have to understand too that the Crimean War was also embarrassing for the British because there were some controversies there. There was a lot of suffering and apparently some issues with regard to professionalism, the behavior of officers, and a lot of the soldiers got sick, etc. Okay, so these are just some aspects of you know um, the conflict on the side of the British. Here's our two stanzas from the poem I just referred to, Tennyson's The Charge of the Light Brigade. As you can see here, it's good to try to understand how Tennyson portrayed those members of the British cavalry that charged anyway and met their doom, you know, in the Crimean War. Forward the Light Brigade, was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered, dares not to make reply. So it wasn't the soldier's job to reply to question, there's not to reason why, there's but to do and die into the valley of death rode the 600. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them, volleyed and thundered, stormed at with shot and shell. Boldly they rode and well into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell, rode the 600. So try to imagine, try to understand how Tennyson wanted to portray those soldiers, okay, in the face of certain death. So, to conclude this discussion, let me just talk about a couple of consequences, a couple of outcomes. First, it was a great victory for the French. So Napoleon III, could claim victory for the French, could you know could claim that okay, the French military is still the most formidable force in Europe. Another important consequence, this signaled the end of the concert of Europe. So these European powers, they came into conflict against one another. Largely, Austria and Russia were maintaining the status quo, but as you saw, Austria refused to explicitly side with the Russians, so they became enemies. On the other hand, Russia withdrew from European affairs. Now, this would have consequences for Austria. Okay, so Austria would be left with no allies anymore, and you could say that this would set up the conditions that would allow for the unification of Italy and Germany. So the conditions are here, since um, some of those territories, some of those areas that would become part of Italy, they were at this time under Austrian rule. Now you have Austria being somehow isolated, so some of the conditions were there for the Italian revolutionaries to try again to unify Italy and form their own nation state. Okay, so we'll talk about Italy and then later on Germany in the following presentations. See you there.